Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the Olympics. The games might be over, but their impact on us remains. We discussed recently a column by Rabbi Abraham Cooper and Reverend Johnny Moore. It was published by the Media Line and picked up all over the world, including in Arabic news sites like Al Arabiya, and Al Jazeera. I want to talk about the issue they raised in more detail, and I want to focus on the moral failure of the Olympic, especially the International Olympic Committee. An Iranian named Javed Foroughi was awarded the gold medal at the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, taking place in 2021, of course. His sport was sharpshooting. After his event, a critical groundswell began to grow, asking that the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, strip Foroughi of his medal. And not just that, they also asked the Japanese authorities to ask Interpol to issue a warrant for the Iranian gold medalist's arrest. The column that was co-authored by Rabbi Abraham Cooper and Reverend Johnny Moore was aptly titled, "Iranian Sharpshooter Olympian Should Be Arrested, Not Given Gold Medal. Opinion." It was subtitled, "Iran's Olympian sharpshooter honed his craft during the Syrian civil war, where civilians, mostly women and children, were often put in the crosshairs of live bullets. He shouldn't be rewarded," unquote. Neither Iran nor Foroughi deny the role he played in the Basij, the paramilitary branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. The Basijs wear civilian clothing. They ride on motorcycles all over the place. Their job is to attack civilians. The IRCG has been deemed a terrorist organization, and by now your mental picture of who Foroughi is, and specifically how he honed his skills, should be crystal clear. Cooper and Moore are correct. Those forming the anti-Foroughi groundswell are on the mark. Foroughi should be stripped of his medal and arrested. But that is very unlikely to happen because the International Olympic Committee is spineless. It took nearly 50 years, 49 years actually, before the IOC held a memorial, an official memorial for the Munich Olympic massacre, to honor the memories of 11 Israeli athletes brutally murdered in the Munich Olympic Village in 1972 by the Palestinian Liberation Organization. At long last, this year in Tokyo, the IOC officially granted a moment of silence in their memory. One moment, after decades of lobbying argumentation, the IOC finally did the right thing and gave their memories a moment. It was a major moral victory, and yet, despite their one moment of conscience, overriding prejudice, the IOC still did not understand the significance of the message and their messaging in general. The essential lesson, which should be obvious, which should need no explanation, is lost on them. Terrorists should not receive Olympic medals. Terrorists should be arrested. Parents should be able to tell their children that the Olympic Games embrace the ideas of peace and morality, that the Olympic Games break down differences and open the doors of international diplomacy, that these ideas are enshrined in the concept of sports diplomacy. And the phoenix of sports diplomacy is the Olympic Games. Instead, the IOC has chosen to continue their history of trampling morality. In 1936, despite proof of anti-Jewish policies in Hitler's Germany, the IOC chose to hold the Games in Germany anyhow. By official decree, Jews were not permitted to qualify for or to compete in the arena. This was the Olympic of four-time gold medalist Jesse Owens. The Olympics during which Adolf Hitler walked out rather than award the medal to a black American man. The Nazi message resounded clearly to anyone paying attention. Out of fear of offending their Nazi host, the United States modified their 4x100 relay team. Athletes Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, the two Jews on the team, were removed. They were replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalfe, two black men. The fastest two runners in America, actually, and they won the gold. Later that year, by the way, the original team broke the world record in an international track meet in LA. And the IOC is not about to change. When Russia was found guilty of systematic doping over years, altering drug tests of their athletes, the IOC could not avoid implementing some sort of punishment. The punishment they chose was to allow 335 Russians to compete in the Tokyo Olympics. but not as Russians. Instead, they are competing. They competed under the label ROC, Russian Olympic Committee, which stands, of course, for corruption. Next year, in 2022, the Winter Olympics are scheduled to take place in China. The human rights abuses perpetrated by the Chinese are too numerous even to list. One example is enough. One example speaks volumes. Over 1 million Uyghurs have been arrested and placed in prison camps by China for the crime of simply being Uyghurs. It's as simple as that. The International Olympic Committee has not yet acted morally or responsibly regarding Javed Faruqi either, and in all probability, they will not. But that does not mean that we should keep quiet, that we should acquiesce to their cowardice. Allowing cold-blooded killer and terrorist Javed Faruqi of Iran to qualify and compete in the Olympic Games was reprehensible. Decent people should stand up and make sure that a travesty of this magnitude never again tarnish the glory that is the Olympic Games. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an editorial from the Jerusalem Post. It's by Moshe Dan. Moshe Dan is actually a PhD in history. He's a tour guide. More precisely, he is a tour guide when tourists are able to come and visit Israel. He's a friend and has been for many years. Unfortunately, because of COVID, there are virtually no tourists in Israel anymore. This piece appeared in the Jerusalem Post on August 7th, 2021. I have known Moshe Dan for many years. He has a very good mind, and he has a piece. This piece actually raises a critical question about morality again. The column is entitled, "The Immoral Goals of Palestinians, Opinion." Subtitled, "The ideology of Palestinianism is that Israel is a settler colonial state on Palestinian land which oppresses Palestinians and has no right to exist." The central issue here revolves around the point of view of mainstream Palestinian political attitudes towards Israel. The point Moshe Dan's column is very clear, that it is immoral to believe that Israel should not exist, and that, however, is the mainstream of Palestinians and their view. This is how Moshe Dan begins. Palestinianism has two goals. Its immediate goal is a Palestinian state under the PLO based on the 1949 armistice lines, comprised of all Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Eastern Jerusalem, and the right of return for millions of Arabs living in UNRWA towns and camps, and millions of others around the world. The Gaza Strip would remain under Hamas. Neither is or would be democratic. Both support terrorism. Its long-term goal is the elimination of Israel, explicitly stated in the PLO covenant and the Hamas charter. A point of correction here and clarification, the PLO actually has amended their charter. I was there in Gaza in the room with Arafat and President Clinton when they amended that charter. But the point still is very, very clear. Moshe Dan continues his analysis and writes that the PA and the Palestinians have a very specific point of view. He writes, "End the occupation, free Palestine, are Palestinian mantras and the core of Palestinianism, part of a long-term agenda to create a Palestinian state from river to the sea. It begins with the PLO or Hamas state of Judea, Samaria, and Eastern Jerusalem. It ends with Israel's demise. Sadly, it's dangerous, destructive, and it's immoral. But it's the reality, and one should never argue with reality." This is his conclusion, and I believe that Dan is correct. The Palestinian philosophy cannot possibly be moral if it involves the destruction of Israel. Next up is a column from Ynet. It was published on August 9th, 2021. It was written by Giora Island. The column is entitled, "Israel Must Act Wisely on the Lebanon Issue." Subtitled, "Analysis: The best way to ensure peace in the north is to back Lebanese calls for international financial aid, but condition it on a reduction of Hezbollah's military and political power, while still maintaining the position that the whole country is responsible for all cross-border aggression." Island is the former head of Israeli military intelligence and was military advisor to the Prime Minister for several years. This is how he begins. "Israel must examine the recent events along its northern border through two lenses. The first of these is a tactical one. There have been 6 instances of rocket fire from Lebanon at Israel in the last 3 months, 5 by unnamed Palestinian factions, and the 6th, the largest barrage of some 20 rockets by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror group. Israel cannot allow itself to become used to this new old reality. So it responded with an airstrike for the first time since 2013, which caused some, albeit minor, damage to access roads in the launch zones. The next time, the Israeli response will likely be stronger. Alongside the tactical side is the strategic aspect, for there is a major struggle currently playing out over Lebanon's future. For the past 20 years, the country had been ruled by a coalition of Sunni and Christian elites on one hand, and Iran's Lebanese proxy Hezbollah on the other. Now Island explains that both sides are to blame, and there's no reason to play that game of who's to blame. He continues, both sides jointly share the blame for the severe decline in the Lebanese economy that has left the country on the brink of a severe humanitarian crisis, with shortages of fuel, electricity, medicine, and food worsening by the day. And now Island explains that the collapse of Lebanon is in no one's best interest. He writes, Israel must impress upon Beirut and the international community that should a third Lebanon war break out, it would not be Israel's against Hezbollah, but rather Israel against the state of Lebanon. The column concludes with Island asserting that something needs to be done, in his words, given that no one in the world wants to see Lebanon collapse, not the Lebanese people themselves, nor Hezbollah, and Iran or the United States, France, and even Saudi Arabia. It could lead to steps being taken to mitigate Hezbollah's military might. This message is already being received by some in Lebanon, primarily among the younger population, who are less convinced of Hezbollah's claims that it is defending the nation. In fact, young Lebanese increasingly view the Shiite group as a threat to the country's very existence. An international initiative on Lebanon, therefore, coupled with an effective Israeli military deterrence against the country proper, is the best way to ensure peace along the northern border. Island makes a very good point. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show 6 cartoons today. 4 cartoons are actually from Dry Bones. Let's begin with a cartoon about cartoonists. Cartoonists often poke fun and laugh at themselves, and often a cartoon is actually the voice of an artist in critique of a certain idea or situation. This is a jab at those who use religion as an excuse. The dialogue begins with a boss who says to his employee, I have a report that you were watching a cartoonist doing a live stream when you should have been working. The employee responds, I'm practicing my religion. I believe a cartoonist is our creator, and reality is some kind of simulation. Boss asks, does the creator love us? Answer, no, he's in it for the money. Of course, the great kunst of this whole piece is that it is a comic and it's drawn by a cartoonist who really is their creator, and yes, who probably, according to the line, is doing it for the money. Next up is a series of Dry Bones, the one I mentioned. The first Dry Bones deals with Lebanon and the Maronite patriarch asking the Lebanese army to control Hezbollah. The caption reads, Lebanon's Maronite Christian patriarch calls for the Lebanese army to take control of Hezbollah's stronghold in the southern part of the country. He's quoted as saying, we call upon the Lebanese army to prevent the launching of missiles not for the sake of Israel, but for the sake of Lebanon. Yep, that's true. It is in Lebanon's best interest to stop the rockets because Israel will certainly retaliate. These next 3 Dry Bones are a special entitled Anti-Semite of the Week. Dry Bones lays out the history of each and why they are worthy of this special distinction. They're a little wordy, but they're very funny. The first is Cynthia Mckinney. In a recent Twitter post, she accused Zionists of being behind the 9/11 terror attack. After numerous complaints, Twitter removed the post but reinstated it after McKinney appealed, saying that her posting was not anti-Semitic, just strong political commentary. The former member of Congress from Georgia And the 2008 Green Party candidate for president has accused Israel of genocide, apartheid, and war crimes. She's recently condemned U.S. support for Israel. Next up is Dry Bones, Anti-Semite of the Week, is Ken Roth. Ken Roth runs Human Rights Watch, using it to attack the Jewish state through false allegations of war crimes, collective punishment, false human rights violations, and apartheid. Roth will appear at this year's Durban Conference, an international Israel bashing session taking place this September, where he will be able to spread his anti-Semitism to a large global audience. The last Anti-Semite of the week is Anuradha Mittal, bigot behind the Ben & Jerry's boycott. She heads Ben & Jerry's board of directors and Ben & Jerry's Foundation Incorporated, and has a long history of supporting anti-Semitic causes and pushing narratives vilifying the Jewish nation. The last cartoon compares the years 2001 to 2021. In 2001, the US was in a tank chasing the Taliban, who rode horses. In 2021, the Taliban are in tanks chasing the US out of Afghanistan. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Even today, spoils of war are a reality. Looting is as wrong today as it was centuries ago, especially when national treasures are stolen as the loot. During the colonial period, the British were notorious looters. The British Museum is filled with stolen artifacts. The head of a sculpture, for example, is on display in the museum, while the rest of the body of the statue stands in situ somewhere in the Middle East. In 2003, during the US operation in Iraq to oust Saddam Hussein, tens of thousands of archaeological artifacts were looted. The United States is now gathering those Iraqi national treasures, and they will return more than 17,000 ancient artifacts looted and smuggled out of Iraq. The most valuable of all the items so far is a 3,500-year-old clay tablet bearing part of the epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the Babylonian creation story. It is their equivalent to the biblical story of Genesis. Countless national treasures of Iraq, archaeological finds and artifacts, were poached or more often destroyed by ISIS, thrown to the ground and smashed into pieces. They destroyed more than the United States took. ISIS controlled a third of Iraq between the years 2014 and 2017, before they were defeated by the Iraqi and international forces. U.S. authorities are working diligently to recover the artifacts. They are literally seizing them from dealers and museums in the United States. And Iraq is grateful. As Iraqi Culture Minister Hassam Nadim told Reuters, the U.S. government seized some of the artifacts and sent them to the Iraqi embassy. The Gilgamesh tablet, the important one, will be returned to Iraq in the next month after legal procedures are finalized. It's never too late to right a wrong. Israel has mandated that people over 60 get their third booster against the coronavirus. The health ministry reported that 295,585 Israelis over the age of 60 received the booster vaccine in the first 5 days of the program. That accounts for about 20% of the people that age. That's remarkable. There is, by the way, no scientific evidence that the third dose will help, but it certainly won't hurt. Interestingly, however, the World Health Organization has asked for a moratorium on the third dose. The rationale is that the entire world should get a first dose of the vaccine before some get a third. This is not a humanitarian gesture. It is a clear attack against Israel. Israel is the only country in the world that has begun administering a third dose of the COVID vaccine. Horrific fires are burning through the southern coastal region of Turkey. According to the Israeli embassy in Ankara, Israel offered to help fight the fires, but Turkish officials refused their offer. According to the Turkish officials, the situation is under control. The Israeli embassy has indicated that their offer of assistance still stands. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his government seem poorly prepared to fight these fires. Their poor response to the horrific fires disseminating, it's remarkable. A huge swath of the country is inexplicable. There has been a great deal of tension between Turkey and Israel, but Israel puts all bygones aside to help save lives, but Turkey still does not want their help. Greece, like Turkey, is also confronting raging and out-of-control fires. Israel, as I mentioned, has a great deal of experience fighting fires. Israelis use computers and use computer models themselves, to fight and plot and fight the fires. When they offered to help Turkey, Turkey rejected their help. When they offered to help Greece with the fires, Greece accepted. A delegation of 16 Israeli firefighters was dispatched to Greece to assist in the fight against the severe wildfires ravaging the country. Thousands of people have fled their homes on the outskirts of Athens. Hundreds were evacuated by boat from the nearby island of Evia. The wildfires are fueled by strong winds and searing temperatures. There has been an increase in tension between Iran and the West. Iran attacked an Israeli leased and managed ship sitting off the coast of Oman, and 2 people were killed, 1 British and 1 Romanian. The ship, named Mercer Street, is registered in Liberia, and the company that runs the ship is actually registered in England. The actual ship is owned by Japan. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz unveiled the identity of the Iranian commander responsible for the deadly strike on the tanker. Briefing the ambassadors of countries on the UN Security Council, Gantz and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid named Saeed Arajani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' UAV command, and claimed that he was directly involved in the attack on the Mercer Street tanker that killed 2 crewmen. And I'm quoting Gantz here. The person directly responsible for these actions is Saeed Arajani, whose name I am revealing for the first time. Arajani is the main operator of the Revolutionary Guard's UAV apparatus, which attacked the Mercer Street. He provides the equipment, training programs, and is responsible for many terrorist actions in the region. Revealing the identity of the commander lets Iran know that there is a target on their back. Banks in the Palestinian Authority have decided not to be the conduit for the agreement that allows for Qatari money to be distributed in Gaza. The banks fear that their cooperation would expose them to legal actions on the grounds of supporting and funding terrorism. International laws are very strict about banking and the support of terror. According to a memorandum of understanding between the State of Palestine through the Ministry of Social Development and the Qatari Foreign Ministry, through the Gaza Rehabilitation Committee, the PA has agreed to transfer Qatari funds through banks subject to the supervision of the Palestinian Monetary Fund, according to a list of names compiled by the Qatari side. The transfers will take place using ATM cards bearing the bank's logo, and will include assistance to 100,000 beneficiaries from poor families, as well as 27,695 other beneficiaries. Most of them are Hamas officials. After the funds are transferred to the Palestinian banks, the PA will issue magnetic cards that will be recharged each month with $100, and these will be handed over to the poor families in the Gaza Strip. All this will happen only after the banks that agree to participate in the plan are found. Right now, there is a serious fear of an international backlash against the Palestinian banks. One of the differences in the new Israeli government and the previous administration is that the Israeli Arab community now sits in the government. And that means that they have power, economic power. And so the new budget has an allocation of 29.5 billion shekel directed toward Israeli minorities. 29.5 billion shekel is equivalent to about $9.18 billion. The 29.5 billion breaks down this way. 21.1 billion as part of a 5-year plan for the Arab sector. 3 billion will be directed to the Druze and Circassian minorities. The Bedouin population will receive 5 billion. This is a major step towards equalization that is long overdue. Israel's COVID infection rate continues to climb. The government is being forced to make difficult decisions. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz told the public that if daily corona infections do not drop, they should prepare for another lockdown. This lockdown will be Israel's 4th. Should it happen, it would be enforced during the high holiday month. Gantz explained his prediction to the coronavirus cabinet. He explained that the lockdown during the high holidays would cause a smaller economic hardship to Israelis than previous lockdowns because so little happens economically during that period of time of the year. Israel is aggressively pushing more vaccinations and has begun to administer the third booster, as I mentioned, to people over the age of 60. Israel does not stand alone in this uptick of COVID numbers. They are just very open and honest about their numbers. The Delta variant is wreaking havoc on the world. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the modern Olympics began in Athens, Greece, in 1896? That's the modern Olympics. Those games were a reenactment of the ancient games, which took place also every 4 years at the sanctuary of Zeus in Olympiad, Greece. Several city-states competed in those Olympics. Years later, Israel created their own version of the Olympic Games. The year was 1932. The games were called the Maccabiah, and they were played in what was then called Palestine. In 1932, until today, the Maccabiah, like the Olympics, is held every 4 years. Jewish athletes from around the world come and compete in what they call the Jewish Olympics. The term Jewish Olympics is important here. The term Maccabiah is also important here. The Greeks were pagans. The Maccabees of old rebelled against the Syrian Greeks, rejecting their culture and their values, especially their paganism. Like the Olympic Games, the Maccabiah embraces the importance of sports with a Jewish twist. That's what makes it special. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.